Julian Rhys made his first mistake the moment he decided to check the bag. He held it for exactly 7 seconds, long enough to feel the cold of what looked like an ordinary black velvet pouch. Not the damp Irish cold he'd grown used to over the past week, but something wrong. A bone-deep chill that radiated from the fabric itself, as if the bag had been kept in a freezer or a morgue. His fingertips had gone white, bloodless. He should have dropped it then, should have stepped away from the wooden desk, away from Glenmalure, away from the Wicklow Mountains. But he didn't. This was his third and fatal mistake. He would realize later what he thought it was research was actually a life sentence. And the second mistake, well, I'll tell you about that in a moment. It was the early 1970s, the Wicklow Mountains of Ireland. Dry weather, unforgiving cold. The lodge had advertised itself as a research-friendly accommodation, which in 1973 meant a decaying former hunting estate that the church had taken over and tried to make respectable. Glenmalure Lodge sat deep in the Wicklow Mountains, surrounded by forests, thick enough to muffle sound and mist that never quite burned off, even at midday. Julian had come for the archives, obscure parish records and folklore collections that might contain references to the little people and their role in Celtic magical traditions. His doctoral thesis needed primary sources, and the remote location suited him fine. He'd grown tired of university politics and the musty air of Oxford libraries. Father Sean O Tuathail had met him at the door 3 days ago, a thin man in his 60s, who moved like he was trying not to disturb the air around him. The priest's hands shook when he poured tea, and he kept glancing toward the hallway that led to the upper floors. When Julian asked about accessing the attic records, Father Sean had gone pale and suggested they start with the ground floor storage room instead. The box of curios had appeared on the second day. Father Sean brought it down himself, setting it on the desk in Julian's room with a mixture of relief and something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. He explained that these were uncatalogued items from Father Colm's quarters, the previous parish priest who died back in the 1890s. The church was desperate for funds to repair the roof, and perhaps Dr. Rhys might be interested in purchasing a few pieces for his research. The price had been absurdly low. Julian mistook it for a great bargain. This was his second mistake. He would never get the chance to regret it. Inside the box, wrapped in yellowed newspaper, Julian had found the usual Victorian ecclesiastical oddments, a tarnished rosary, several hand-copied prayer books in Irish, a collection of pressed flowers that had turned to brown dust, and then, at the bottom, the black velvet bag. It was secured with a rusty silver cord tied in an elaborate knot that looked more decorative than functional. The bag itself was embroidered with symbols Julian didn't immediately recognize, not Christian crosses or Celtic knots, but something older, more angular. He'd waited until evening to open it. The fire in his room crackled and spat, but the bag remained cold when he lifted it again. Julian untied the silver cord carefully, noting how the metal left rust-colored residue on his fingers. The velvet fell away, and inside was a bone. A femur, human, almost certainly, only smaller than it should have been. Darker, too. Not the clean white of medical specimens, but a deep brownish gray, like old tobacco stains had soaked into the calcium itself. The bone was surprisingly heavy, dense in a way that made Julian's anthropological training kick in. He turned it under his desk lamp, noting the rough texture, the strange smoothness at both ends, and the smell. Faint but persistent, metallic and salty, like old blood mixed with something else. Seawater, maybe, or the mineral tang of deep caves. Julian set the bone on his desk and began taking notes. The size suggested either a young person or someone with a growth disorder. The coloration indicated age, possibly ritualistic treatment. The weight was unusual, almost as if the bone had absorbed moisture and minerals over decades of improper storage. He made sketches, measurements, notes for carbon dating when he returned to the lab. The grinding started at 2:47 in the morning. Julian woke with his heart already pounding, that instant alertness that comes when your sleeping brain registers something fundamentally wrong. The fire had died to coals, leaving the room in near darkness except for the faint orange glow. The sound was low, rhythmic, a scraping like someone running a file back and forth across wood. Bone on wood, his mind supplied unhelpfully. He lit the oil lamp with shaking hands. The warm light spread across the desk, and Julian saw the bag. It was vibrating, not violently, just a subtle tremor, like a phone set to silent. Around its base, a perfect circle of white powder had appeared on the dark wood. Bone dust, his training told him, calcium particles ground so fine they looked like chalk. The grinding stopped the moment the lamplight touched the bag. Julian didn't sleep the rest of that night. He sat in the chair by the fire, feeding it logs and watching the desk. The bag didn't move again, but the smell had intensified. That salt metal blood odor now mixed with something earthier, like freshly turned soil in a graveyard. When Father Colm brought breakfast the next morning, Julian asked him directly about the bone. The priest's cup rattled against its saucer. He set it down quickly, tea slopping onto the wood. For several long seconds, he just stared at Julian, his face cycling through emotions: surprise, horror, resignation, and finally something that looked like bitter sympathy. He told Julian about Father Colm, about the obsessive Victorian priest who'd been desperate to protect church property from local resistance, people who still clung to older beliefs, who resented the church's growing power. Father Colm had hired someone, Father Colm said, choosing his words carefully. A local woman who knew the old ways. She'd performed a ritual, a binding, using a man from the area. Someone the locals had considered special, touched by the old magic. Someone born different, Father Colm had added, his voice dropping. A dwarf, people called him then, though that word didn't capture what he'd been. Fionn, they'd named him, the Fair One. The ritual had used his bone, the strongest bone, the femur that carries the body's weight, to bind his spirit into a Geas, an oath that couldn't be broken. Father Colm had wanted a protector, an enforcer to deal with his enemies quietly. What he'd gotten was something angrier, more vengeful than any prayer could hold. When Father Colm died, suddenly, Father Colm emphasized, and badly, the bone had been locked away. The church knew enough not to destroy it, but not enough to know what else to do. So they'd kept it, hoping it would be forgotten. And now Julian had touched it. Father Colm's exact words stayed with Julian for the rest of that day. It serves the master who holds it. It thinks you're the new priest. It's waiting for you to give it orders. That night, Julian tried to ignore the bag. He pushed it to the far corner of his desk, buried under papers and books. He built up the fire until the room was almost uncomfortably warm. He read by lamplight until his eyes ached, determined to stay awake. The grinding started again at midnight, but this time it wasn't coming from the desk. It was on the floor, moving. Julian sat frozen in his chair, the book forgotten in his lap, as the sound worked its way across the wooden boards. Scrape, drag, scrape. A rhythm, like something pulling itself forward, inch by inch. The sound circled his chair once, staying just outside the lamp's pool of light. He could see shadows moving in his peripheral vision, quick, darting movements that were too low to the ground, too fluid to be human. The scraping reached his bedroom door and stopped. Then it started up again, faster now, more insistent. Scrape, 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 rapid and desperate, like fingernails on wood, like something that wanted in or wanted out. Julian grabbed the lamp and crossed to the door in 3 quick strides. The sound stopped the instant he touched the handle. He yanked the door open. The hallway was empty, but on the floor, directly outside his threshold, were marks, thin white scratches in the old wood, arranged in sets of 3, like something with clawed fingers had been digging at the door from the outside. In the morning, Julian made his decision. The bone couldn't be destroyed. Father Colm had been clear about that. Burning it, burying it, none of that would break the Geas. The spirit was bound to the bone, and the bone would always find its way back to whoever had claimed it, intentionally or not. There were rituals Father Colm had mentioned, purification rites that might sever the connection. But those required knowledge Julian didn't have, and time he couldn't afford. The only solution was to make sure no one could ever claim it again. The cave system at the top of Glen Malure was local knowledge, a series of deep limestone caverns that wound into the mountain like a stone labyrinth. Mairead Cullen, the lodge's housekeeper, had mentioned them once, warning Julian away. Dangerous, she'd said. People had gotten lost in there over the years. The openings were narrow, the passages confusing. Some of the deeper caverns had never been properly mapped. Perfect, Julian thought. He wrapped the bone back in its velvet bag and tied the silver cord. The bag was colder than ever, so cold it burned his fingers through his leather gloves. He shoved it into his rucksack along with a torch, matches, and rope. He didn't tell Father Colm where he was going. He simply got in his car and drove. The mountain road was steep and winding, barely wide enough for one vehicle. Mist clung to the slopes, and the trees pressed in close on either side. Julian kept his eyes on the road, focused on the mechanics of driving, gear changes, steering, watching for the turnoff. But he couldn't ignore the sound. It was inside the car with him. Scrape, drag, scrape, coming from somewhere behind his seat. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw nothing. Checked the side mirrors and caught, just for a second, a flicker of shadow keeping pace with the car. Something small and low, moving impossibly fast through the trees alongside the road. His hands tightened on the wheel. He pressed the accelerator harder, taking the curves faster than was safe. The engine whined, the tires squealed. The scraping sound grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever made it was running out of time. The cave mouth appeared as a dark gash in the hillside, half hidden by overgrown gorse. Julian parked 20 yards away and grabbed his rucksack. The moment he stepped out of the car, the scraping stopped. The silence was worse. Julian walked quickly to the cave entrance, his torch cutting a weak beam through the perpetual twilight. The opening was narrow. He had to turn sideways to squeeze through, but it opened into a larger chamber within a few feet. The air inside was cold and still, with that particular dead quality of spaces where sound doesn't travel right. He went deeper, following the main passage as it sloped downward into the mountain's heart. The walls pressed in, then opened up, then pressed in again. Side tunnels branched off in all directions, black mouths leading to who knew where. Julian ignored them, pushing forward until he reached a section where the passage narrowed to a crawl space. There in the back he found what he was looking for, a crevice in the rock wall, barely wider than his arm, that disappeared into darkness. He could feel cold air flowing from it, which meant it went deep, very deep. Julian pulled the velvet bag from his rucksack. It pulsed in his hand now, a faint, rhythmic throb like a second heartbeat. The bone inside seemed to have grown warmer, or maybe it was just that the cave was colder. He could feel something else too, a weight pressing on his chest, a paranoia that made his skin crawl and his thoughts spiral. The spirit was active, aware. It knew what he was doing. He shoved the bag as far into the crevice as his arm could reach, feeling the fabric catch on rough stone. Then he began packing rocks into the opening, small ones first, then larger, wedging them tight until the crevice was completely sealed. He used every rock he could pry from the cave floor, building a crude but solid wall. When he finished, his hands were bleeding and his breathing was ragged. But the pulsing had stopped. The pressure on his chest eased. Julian backed away, keeping his torch trained on the sealed crevice. Nothing moved. Nothing scraped. He made his way back through the passages, emerging into the gray Irish daylight with overwhelming relief. The drive down the mountain was quiet. No scraping, no shadows in the mirrors, just the sound of the engine and his own heartbeat gradually slowing to normal. Julian made it to Dunlawgare port by evening and booked passage on the first ferry to Wales. He didn't pack his things from the lodge. He didn't say goodbye to Father Sian or Meriad. He just left. Back in Oxford, Julian tried to return to normal life. He wrote up his research notes, focusing on the folklore aspects and carefully omitting any mention of the bone or what had happened in Glenmalure. He attended department meetings, taught his seminars, worked on his thesis. But something had changed. He couldn't sleep in the dark anymore. Every time he turned off the lights, he felt it, a crushing weight, like tons of stone pressing down from above. The sealed crevice in the mountain cave, buried under rock in permanent darkness. His rational mind knew he was safe in his Oxford flat, but his body didn't believe it. He slept with every light on, and even then he dreamed of narrow spaces and cold stone. The claustrophobia got worse over the months. Elevators became impossible. Crowded lecture halls made him panic. Even his own office, with its walls of books and narrow windows, started to feel like a tomb. His colleague, Dr. Margaret Wells, noticed. She brought it up over coffee one afternoon, gently suggesting he might want to talk to someone. Julian had deflected, made excuses about stress and overwork, but he'd seen the concern in her eyes. That was 3 years ago. The journal entry that Margaret found was dated April 17th, 1976. She'd gone to Julian's flat after he'd missed a week of classes without explanation. The door had been unlocked. Inside, everything was exactly as Julian had left it. Books open on the desk, a cold cup of tea, all the lights on despite the daytime hour. And on the desk, his research journal, open to the final entry. Margaret read it 3 times before she understood what it meant. I heard a scratch outside the window, not bone on wood, but stone on stone. The seal is broken. The master is needed. The police searched, of course. Dr. Julian Rhys had simply vanished. No body, no witnesses, no trace. His car was still parked outside his flat. His wallet and passport were in his bedroom drawer. He'd left behind his entire life, as if he'd stepped out for a moment and never returned. Margaret inherited his research materials. She spent weeks going through them, piecing together the story from his notes about Glenmalure Lodge, Father Sian, the Victorian priest, and his desperate binding ritual. She found references to the Cnaman Geasa, the vow bone, and descriptions of the spirit named Fionn. She found drawings too, sketches Julian had made during those last months. The same image repeated over and over, a narrow crevice in stone, rocks piled high, and in the margin, a single question scrawled in increasingly shaky handwriting. How long does it take for a spirit to dig through rock? Margaret closed the journal for the last time on a Thursday evening. The university library was empty, most students already gone for the spring break. She sat alone at the desk, Julian's papers spread before her, trying to decide what to do with them. Archive them, publish them as a cautionary tale about the psychological toll of folklore research, or burn them. She was still deciding when she heard it. A sound from somewhere in the stacks behind her, faint but unmistakable. Scrape, drag, scrape, stone on stone. We have reached the end. You've heard the vow. But tell me, how long does it take for a spirit to dig through rock? The night isn't over just because the story is. Some burdens don't disappear when the telling stops. They wait to be carried. We'll be waiting in the shadows, listening for the scrape. See you next week in another haunting episode. Same day at 3 a.m.